Hi, this is Symphonic Elk, and today we're going to have something a little bit different. So I'm coming to you from a dreary Friday late morning, and I had promised in my last comic book call that I would discuss some of my thoughts on collecting in general and kind of discuss how I've been able to build up my comic book collection fairly quickly. So in order to do that, I think I should talk a little bit about, I guess, my origin story. I grew up in the '80s. My first love for collecting was baseball cards. I was lucky enough to have a family that owned a toy store, so I was able to get a lot of the toys that I wanted. But things like comic books or later on magic cards and those kind of things were difficult to obtain in the small town in Georgia that I grew up. So it was something that I had to often drive um, over an hour to get. And so from an early age, I had to think about what I wanted to get because not only was I limited by the amount of money that I had, as most children and a lot of adults are, I also was limited by the fact that there really wasn't anything close to me in order to purchase really any comic books at all. The only place to buy comic books in the town that I grew up in was essentially the convenience store, which was called Swanee Swifty. I don't think they exist anymore, and they probably were a regional chain even back in the '80s. So, um, as I grew up, I really, like I said, I had pretty much access to all the toys that I wanted in the '80s. Uh, and then I had access to sports cards, particularly baseball cards, but much less so to comic books. I did mostly read and collect the X-Men titles. Those were some that I could get. I could also pick up Spider-Man every once in a while. And whenever I went out of town, I tried to buy Image and Valiant stuff in the early '90s. Like I said, at times that could be somewhat difficult. Anyway, so I collected comic books pretty much all of my life, off and on through graduate school. Once I graduated and I got a job in the real world, I had to move up to the DC area, where, if you're familiar with it, there is not a lot of room. Um, and if you do have a lot of room, it's because you're paying a lot in rent. And at the time, I didn't really want to do that. So I lived in a small place, and I kind of had to just store my comic books at my parents' house in Georgia, and didn't um, didn't really buy anything from about 2005 to 2015, with the exception of going across the street from my office with one of my coworkers, who I'll talk about in a little while, and buying random comics that he recommended that he thought might go up. So I guess in some ways I was speculating at the time. Ironically, one of the last comic books that I purchased was Walking Dead #1, which I did sell a lot earlier than I should have. But yeah, what are you going to do? So what I had been doing for the last couple of years is collecting vintage toys and retro video games. I did a video on my Star Wars figures recently, and a game room tour about a year ago. You can find both of those on my channel. But as I've kind of gotten everything that I wanted in both of those two hobbies, I really started thinking back to when I was a kid and what I enjoyed the most. And honestly, it was comic books. So I got my old comic books that I had brought up finally from my parents' house, and I started going through them, and I tried to make room. So I kept some of the ones that I thought were worthwhile, and then I donated the rest of them to one of the local military hospitals, which I think is great. Donating old comic books to schools, to military hospitals is great. One of the nice things about the military is if you have like Vertigo titles and things like that, you know, walk the fine line of probably being appropriate for middle school and elementary school kids. If you donate them to the military hospitals, you don't really have to worry about that and going through them. So that's what I did. Anyway, so I started collecting again, and you know, I'm lucky enough that I have the finances to kind of buy what I want, but on the other hand, I don't want to go crazy, and I certainly don't want to waste money. So I try to, do a couple of things in my collecting that make this hobby a little bit cheaper, um, and just opens up doors for finding books and whatnot. So I'm gonna try to go over them. I don't really think any of them are novel. They're not new ideas, but I do think that that's something that you can apply to your collecting and really anything, and you know it's worthwhile. So the first thing that I think is important is kind of to decide what type of collector you want to be. So, for example, uh, specifically in vintage Star Wars figures, most people can't afford to collect everything because minor variations can cost price swings of thousands of dollars. And even the least sought after figures, if they're still carded, are worth $100. And then the ones that are quite sought after can be $4,000 or $5,000. And that's not even counting, like I said, the weird variations, the differences from cards from foreign countries and whatnot. So what you'll find in the Star Wars community is you'll find people who have focuses. So their focus might be Chewbacca or R2D2 or Sith Lords or whatever, and they literally just buy C3PO figures or just buy Chewbacca figures and nothing else. And if you're on a budget, you can also apply this to the comic book. So maybe you're really into variant covers, or maybe you're just really into the cool covers. So just your focus is on buying those. It's really easy to get distracted by whatever the newest thing is, what movies are coming out, what speculation, etc. Maybe you're interested in picking up key issues. Well, there are a lot of key issues that are not blue chips. You don't have to get a Daredevil #1. You don't have to get an Amazing Fantasy 15. You don't even have to get Forever People #1, the first appearance of Darkseid. I mean, you can get lots of first appearances for a couple of bucks to anywhere to under 100, and some of them are quite important, like the first appearance of the black Spider-Man in the black costume. And so figure out what you want to do and focus on collecting those issues first, and then you can later on move to other things, or if you find really good deals, obviously buy them. But that allows you to pick up what you want, and always have the funds ready if something appears that you're interested in. The other thing that's important is kind of decide what kind of condition you're looking for. If you see my videos, you know that condition generally is not that important to me. For me, as long as the issue presents well and is complete, I'm generally happy. However, like I mentioned before, I have a coworker who he and his brother share a collection, and for them, everything has to be 9.0 and above. And I'm not talking about recent comics where a 9.6 or a 9.8 is pretty easily to obtain. I mean, they have Fantastic Four 48, like a 9.2. They have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles #1, first print, 9.4. And so they've, dropped thousands and thousands of dollars. So on one hand, their collection is certainly worth more than mine is, but I have a lot more of the key issues than they do. But they're fine with that. They want really, really high grade copies, where I'm not as interested in doing that. I would rather just have the issue, have it present well, and then enjoy it and move on to hunting for the next thing. The other thing is like I think about this in generally in life, is everyone has talents that don't necessarily pertain to the hobby they're in, the job they're in, the whatever, and you should try to parlay those talents into developing relationships with people within the collecting community. So some people are really good at editing videos. Others are, really good at doing presentation, talking. So, reaching out to your fellow community members and helping them out with that is important. But it's not just about YouTube. It's just also could be said the same thing within your local collecting community. So, for example, I used to have a very expensive and comprehensive Magic the Gathering card collection, and I've gotten rid of it years ago. But one of my friends who owns a store and I get a lot of my blue chip grails. He buys huge collections of Magic cards, but doesn't really know much about them, and it takes him forever to go through them because he feels like he needs to look up every card. Well, I can look through 1,000 cards in a couple of minutes and pull out everything that's worthwhile. And I might not know the exact prices, the up-to-date ones, but I do know whether or not he should look them up. So instead of looking up 1,000 different cards, he's looking up, 15 or 20. And because of that, I've developed a relationship with him, and I've gotten early access to comic books when he buys collections. I've gotten to look through long boxes that he doesn't let other people look through. I've gotten great deals on anything from Showcase 22 to Daredevil #1 most recently, and he's a good guy. Another thing is, it doesn't that's germane to the hobby, I guess one of my talents. But it doesn't have to actually be like that. So, for example, I had a buddy who built his own deck, and he got to talking to one of the dealers at a comic book show about that. And at the time, the dealer was looking at building a new stand for his wall comics that he could bring to shows. So it needed to be both sturdy but also portable at the same time. And he was looking at spending a decent amount of money. In the end, my friend ended up making it for him, and he, gave him some nice comic books. And ever since then, he cuts this guy great deals.